So after doing the Sinbad versus Yuha video, I kind of realized I didn't do a versus video for Yami Yugi, so I decided that we would go ahead and do one for him. Let's just go ahead and fix that problem that we have here on the Bleach Hub channel. Now, I can't pit him up against Sinbad for obvious reasons, because I think Sinbad is a little too broken as demonstrated by the Sinbad versus Yuha video, and I can't pit him up against any of the Fate characters, so all that's left to do is pit Yami Yugi against the entirety of the Bleach verse. Because I think that's far more interesting than just reusing Yuha every single time, because let's talk about how Yami Yugi would do against the entirety of the verse, as opposed to just fighting one guy, especially since Yu-Gi-Oh characters are pretty well tailored to being able to fight like an entire verse because of how their power system works. But you guys should know how this is going to go down. We're going to go over the strength of Yami Yugi, the Bleach verse, their speeds and abilities. Although for the Bleach verse, you're going to have to excuse me for kind of shotgunning through it, because otherwise we would be here for quite literally like 3 hours going over every single ability in the verse. I'll try to cover all of the very good ones, but if someone tries to comment and say, well, what about Momo Zanpakuto? Then I might just have to lose my mind. Now, before we begin the video, if you could toss your boy a like and subscribe if you enjoy power scaling content, that's predominantly what we do over here on the Bleach Hub channel. It's quite literally becoming Bleach power scaling, and then all of the solo your favorite verse type characters. So if either of those things interest you, consider clicking that subscribe button and giving the video a like. You can also click that join button if you want extra content here on the channel, because you'll gain access to all of the past live streams and every debate that I have done and will do in the future. So if you're starving for content, you have that option available to you. If you're more interested in Fate, because I know a lot of people in my audience do like Fate, I have a second channel called ZTL, linked down in the description down below, where that is primarily what we cover over there. There's also a Twitch channel linked down below if you want to see me go live on weekdays. There is plenty of extra content for you guys if you are just absolutely starving for content. But with that being said, let's go ahead and jump right into this video, starting off with Yami Yugi's strength. Now, I will advise you guys, if you want a more in-depth look at Yami Yugi, to go ahead and look at my Yami Yugi video. That is going to go far more in-depth than this video will, and it'll give him more credit to how strong he is. But I'll go ahead and go over the different tiers very briefly here. Now, there's a few different ways you can scale Yami Yugi. The first way would be to scale him to planetary using the Egyptian God cards, as the Egyptian God cards are said to have enough power to destroy the planet, and they're actually said to be relative to the sacred beasts, who also have enough power to destroy the planet. You could also try to backscale them to characters like Destiny Hero Plasma or Blood D if you're watching the sub, who is a Light of Destruction tier character, which the Light of Destruction, if you do not know, has the power to destroy the universe. Now, how does this scale back to Yami Yugi? Well, for one, Yami Yugi just blatantly tanked an attack from the Winged Dragon of Ra during Mai's duel against Merrick, because for whatever reason, Yugi felt the need to put himself between the Winged Dragon of Ra and Mai. But because he decided to do that, we now have this very solid, just direct scaling method from the Egyptian God cards to Yami Yugi. Now, for some people saying that these are just cards, or they're just holograms, or any one of those like really bad arguments, for one, I'd question if you even watched the series of Yu-Gi-Oh, where the entire point is that it actually is not just a card game. The entirety of Yu-Gi-Oh and Yu-Gi-Oh GX is setting up the fact that the cards are actually real and they are not just holograms. The cards themselves actually contain the spirits of the duel monsters, and they're essentially just Pokemon, but with cards instead of Pokeballs. That's probably the best way to just go about looking at it. But even if for whatever reason you didn't accept all of that, the Egyptian God cards are actual real entities in the Yu-Gi-Oh verse. They haunt people, they cause them to unalive themselves. They even try to straight up murder people whenever they misuse their cards, like when Odeon tried to use the fake version of the Winged Dragon of Ra. And for whatever reason, the Winged Dragon of Ra also attacked Joey, because I guess the Winged Dragon of Ra is just out here for smoke. There's also the concept of a duelist spirit in Yu-Gi-Oh, where you have to have a certain dual energy to use certain cards and actually summon their full power and whatnot. This is actually why someone like Kaiba, who should have a really bricky deck with his Blue Eyes deck in Duel Monsters, never really seems to brick. Same thing with Yugi. They both have this absolute mishmash deck, but they're able to use it pretty perfectly and get out all their combos. This is actually linked to their dual spirit, and that's considered to be their quote-unquote skill, is that they never brick, as drawing is actually something you can level up in the Yu-Gi-Oh verse to get better draws. So if you're ever playing the game and you're wondering why am I still bricking, your skill level might just be really low. Just do what the boy Taizan did and start drawing cards for a year, and I'm sure you'll improve your draws. But because of this dual spirit and dual energy type thing that we have going on in Yu-Gi-Oh, it does mean that you have to be somewhat relative to your cards to be able to summon and maintain them. In fact, in this duel between Yami Merrick and Mai Valentine, it's actually a shadow game where it doesn't get any more blatant that the cards are actually real, meaning that Yami Merrick has enough power to summon the Winged Dragon of Ra, in its true incarnation, and Yugi has enough power to tank said Winged Dragon Raw, and he's also, relative to Yami Merrick as he does beat him in a duel, he's also a relative rival to Seto Kaiba, who has enough power with his Raw Dual Spirit to summon a full power Blue Eyes White Dragon, which is said to rival the gods, and in the Millennium World arc he has enough power to summon the Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, which surpasses the gods. So basically, there's like 15 million different avenues of scaling for getting Yami Yugi to scale to the Egyptian god cards, and at bare minimum they're planetary, and at max they're maybe universal if you want to scale them to the Light of Destruction tier characters. But probably the best thing that Yami Yugi has going for him is that he actually faces end of series Jaden, and this basically just allows Yami Yugi to not get left behind in the power scaling chain, because Jaden over here, if you guys don't know, is out here doing like multiversal and higher dimensional acts. He's beating Yu Bell, who is like creating and fusing different multiverses together, and then Darkness is from a completely separate multiverse and he beats him up. Whereas Yami Yugi and Duel Monsters characters are sitting with their planetary scaling, but then right at the end of GX they decide to have Yami Yugi duel Jaden to make sure that Yami Yugi is not left behind in the scaling chain, and basically Yami Yugi and Jaden both call each other the strongest person they've ever faced. Technically it's Yugi Moto who says that Jaden is the strongest person he's ever faced, but this is the same Yugi Moto that would go on to beat Item in like 2 weeks when they go to Egypt, so they should all be rather relative to one another. Also, Atem seemed very excited to duel against Jaden as well, so there's an air of them all being pretty relative to one another. So bottom line, he should be multiversal unless you actually don't think that duel between Jaden and Yugi actually happened. I'll actually cover that in an upcoming video that I'm going to be doing about Yugi versus Jaden. But if you're one of those people that buys into that theory, then Yami Yugi should still be planetary to universal. Moving on to the Bleach side of things, there's a few different tiers we have for all the Bleach characters. The first most notable tier would be the Espada scaling tier, where anybody that's able to fight any member of the Espada would scale to at least the bare minimum being country level, as that is the absolute weakest you would have to be able to destroy Las Noches, although there are calcs that get it up to being continental and even multi-continental. And if you want to use some finessery, you can actually argue that destroying Las Noches should be star level or solar system level, because Aizen did put a star in there, and you could argue that you would have to destroy the star inside of Las Noches or all of the space inside of Las Noches as well, and that would make you either star or solar system level, because if you have a star in there, you have to have the space between the star and the actual realm that they're in. Otherwise, they would actually just look like Mercury. It would be like a volcanic wasteland if it was too close. But there's also arguments that it doesn't function like that, and that Las Noches is more like the Room of Spirit and Time in Dragon Ball, so I'll let you guys in the comments debate that amongst yourselves. But this really doesn't matter because this is kind of the weakest tier that you would get a lot of these Bleach characters at. Things actually start to get far more impressive when we move to the 1000-Year Blood War arc, where you have characters like Gremmy, who's just casually creating these pocket dimensions that contain numerous stars and actually 2 galactic-sized structures, meaning that Gremmy's imagination is just kind of casually multi-galaxy tier, and he actually can't imagine anything stronger than Kenpachi, meaning that really anybody in the 1000-Year Blood War arc that you think could fight Gremmy or that could fight Kenpachi with his Shikai should scale to being low multi-galaxy tier. And then even higher than that, we have people that can actually fight God Yuha or that scale to the Soul King himself, because Yuha's ultimate plan in the Bleach series is to basically destroy all of the different realms and then recreate the universe in his own image without death, and it's going to be a nice utopia. This never actually worked out, but we have about 13 different statements of Yuha saying he's going to destroy the universe, and numerous different credible characters saying that he is going to do this. At bare minimum, this would be universal, and at most would be multi-universal. There's actually a difference between multiversal and multi-universal, and essentially this is how it breaks down. So we have our infinite 3D space, and we have a 4D construct that constructs it, because you need something larger than that infinity to contain the infinite 3-dimensional space, and that's where 4D comes in, because the 4D construct that holds in the infinite 3D space is more than infinitely larger than that infinite 3D space. So then you have a bunch of 4D constructs floating around, and those are what we call the universes. But we need something to contain all of the different universes, and that's what the multiverse is. The 5D construct is more than infinitely larger than the 4D construct, so it can actually contain all of them. And then this basically just keeps going on with each higher tier. Essentially, the dimensions in the different universes are just higher levels of infinity. It's actually very, very simple once you break it down. And the tier that Yuha is at is that debatably infinite 3D or 4D tier. That's more what people are arguing. Is he just going to be destroying the infinite 3D space inside of the universes, or is he destroying the 3D constructs that holds those universes together? And so at the absolute best, you'd have them being 4D, with Yuha destroying all of the universes inside the Bleach verse, and then basically recreating it as he sees fit. The only things we really have in Bleach that go up to higher dimensions is the interview that Kubo gave with the Hellverse movie. When we originally got this translated, people were saying that he was using words that related to space-time theory, and the way he was talking is pretty much specifically only used when talking about said space-time theory and multiverse theory. However, shortly after, they disagreed with their translation and said that they didn't actually talk about that at all. So then that leaves us with the deicide scaling, where Aizen and Ichigo are talking about being higher dimensional beings, and it really comes down to if you're taking that literally or not. If you're taking it literally, then a lot of the high tier characters in Bleach should be like 7-dimensional, but if you don't take it seriously, then they should be about 4D. Next, we'll talk about speed, and Yami Yugi actually has some pretty definitive speed scaling. In the duel against Jaden, it's stated to be in a dimension with no time, and that's just blatantly a feat for inaccessible speed, but you can actually get him to immeasurable speed if you use the duel with Bakura in the Millennium World arc at the very end of Duel Monsters, because Bakura has an item that allows him to reverse time, as Zork, for whatever reason, is a master of time, and he actually reverses time backwards, so they're going backwards in time, and the characters are still able to move inside of this reverse time, which means they're still capable of moving while time travel is enacting, meaning they would have immeasurable speed. So pick your poison. Does he have inaccessible speed, or does he have immeasurable speed? It really doesn't matter which one, because they're both quite good. Bleach, on the other hand, is also pretty easy to cover, because they're either just like very high into MFTL because of the Mime Hage scaling, where the Mime Hage and the Ash Swollen are able to travel the distance of a few solar systems to a few galaxies, going off of Ichigo's travel time between the Soul Palace and the Soul Society. It really varies depending on how fast you think Ichigo is at that point. Conservative estimates put him at about light speed, but I know people that calculate with him being at like a couple hundred times the speed of light to a couple thousand times the speed of light, and it drastically alters how fast the end of series characters are. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of higher tier speed arguments for Bleach that are very valid. There's a lot of meme arguments that are pretty good if you're having like a meme debate with somebody on Discord or in YouTube comments. But as far as being an actual valid argument that doesn't have any holes in it, I mean, they kind of fall short in a lot of areas. The best two that you could really argue are the Dangai Precipice World, or using the Reigai Arc Ichigo, where the Reigai Arc Ichigo is able to basically do like an infinite time loop, where an Ichigo from the future comes back to save an Ichigo from the past from getting blasted off in the Dangai Precipice World, and it basically just creates an infinite loop of Ichigo traveling through time to save himself. If you can argue that the Reigai Arc is canon and that this should scale to the main timeline, then by all means go ahead and pop off with that one. Or you can just make your life easier and say you're using a composite version of Ichigo. Then there's the Dangai Precipice World, which has, you know, the whole weird non-linear time going on, where time is essentially compressed in the Dangai Precipice World, and even the being that rules over the Dangai Precipice World, the Katotsu, actually has the ability to banish people from their normal temporal axis, which is getting in the range of immeasurable speed. It kind of just depends on how you piece the argument together. It's a little finicky because all the pieces are there, but it's like we need one more statement to kind of put them all together. Because as it stands right now, it just seems like the Katotsu has really good time BFR, because nobody really resists it, unless you want to try to argue that Aizen's spiritual pressure resists getting banished throughout time, and maybe his spiritual pressure has immeasurable speed. Or you want to argue that because Orihime's ability didn't get destroyed by it, it rejected immeasurable speed BFR, but I think that's more of just a hack's resistance on their part. But again, I'll leave that up to you guys in the comments down below. Moving on to Yami Yugi's abilities, one of the best things that he has is that he just actually has a ton of monsters at his disposal that he can help fight the entire Bleach cast. And looking at Dark Side of Dimensions, we actually know that these characters can fill their monsters with their own dual spirit to give them power. So this will definitely help him not get jumped in this battle, because again, he is fighting the entire verse at once, so not getting jumped is a huge plus. Although when it comes down to the actual monsters at his disposal, the main ones that he's probably going to be using are going to be the likes of the Dark Magician Girl, Gaia the Fierce Knight. We'll probably see a Cursive Dragon thrown in there. The Black Luster Soldier, the Super Soldier himself will probably show up as well. I imagine the Egyptian God cards will find time in their very busy schedule to come help out Yami Yugi. And then, you know, you'll probably see some goons like Celtic Guardian running around. Unfortunately, aside from the Egyptian God cards, not a whole lot of these monsters actually really have any abilities to speak of, and they're really just going to be big beat sticks. Thankfully, a lot of characters in Bleach are also pretty simple. It's very rare to get like super OP abilities in Bleach, which again, we'll talk about when we talk about the Bleach abilities, but a lot of the abilities are very simple, so they shouldn't be in that much of a bind when it comes to this battle, until they start running into the really OP abilities. Although that being said, he has a lot of spells and traps he can use in combination with his monsters to basically get some free kills. For instance, he can use Thousand Knives with his Dark Magician to basically just start sniping people on the battlefield. So if he sees somebody that's really troublesome, he pops that spell with Dark Magician, and as long as Dark Magician is strong enough to kill that opponent, it'll just get instantly killed. He also has traps like Negate Attack and Magical Hats that can help keep his monsters alive. In fact, Negate Attack is really good in this fight because what it actually does is it saps the opponent of all of their energy to actually end their attack and end the battle phase. That actually comes from GX, by the way, if anybody is curious. And then you have the Egyptian God cards that are basically unaffected by literally everything, and are just giant big Ooga Booga beat sticks. The most notable one that's probably going to be putting in the most work is going to be the Winged Dragon of Ra, as in its Phoenix mode it does have this insane holy fire that basically destroys your mind, body, and soul, and will just keep attacking things until they are all gone. So I imagine the Winged Dragon of Ra is going to be out here putting in some work. Yami Yugi himself actually has some pretty good soul resistance and soul hexes. The most notable one is probably going to be the Mind Crush that everybody knows about, which is actually stronger than you think it is. It actually shatters his opponent's soul and forces them to put themselves back together, or it just outright kills them if they're unable to piece their soul together. It's a very powerful ability that has a very specific resistance that you need. Keep in mind the only person that did this in the Yu-Gi-Oh series was Seto Kaiba, the god himself. While there is much more that Yami Yugi is capable of, if you're curious and want to know more about what he can do and more in depth with some of the monsters and abilities, go ahead and check out the Yami Yugi video. Bleach has a laundry list of different abilities, and a lot of like really mid-tierish abilities that are pretty useful. Like for instance, you have people like Izuru that doesn't have a super broken ability, but being able to double the weight of anything that he hits is actually fairly useful. Then you have someone like Shinsui who could also be pretty useful, depending on what game his Zanpakuto gives him. People do often forget that Shinsui does say that his Zanpakuto is very finicky, and that he does not choose the game that he will play, but the Zanpakuto chooses the game that it wants to play. So depending on what game the Zanpakuto gives, Shinsui can actually be very useful, but we have way better abilities than that in Bleach. Probably the most broken one that people really think about when they think of Bleach broken abilities is Kyoka Suigetsu. Essentially, Bleach's take on the Sharingan Genjutsu. It allows Aizen, the user of Kyoka Suigetsu, to take complete control over his opponent by manipulating their 5 senses. But it actually goes beyond the 5 senses because it actually affects their spiritual senses as well. Then you have people like Yugioh, who has the Broken Almighty ability that essentially gives him control over fate because he's able to jump between different timelines to get the best possible outcome for himself, and he can even change timelines in which he's died. Even though Baragon's not very strong when we talk about end of series Bleach characters, his ability is still very broken because Baragon has the ability to age things very rapidly, and when I say rapidly, I'm talking Kido that can last for millions of years aging in a few seconds. And he also has the ability to just strangely enough slow down time around him or on an opponent. Most of the top tier Quincy's also have very broken abilities, like Gerard, who literally just cannot die unless you yeet his soul out of his body, and in fact he just gets stronger every time you try to attack him. Pernida adapts to the battle and again is very hard to kill with his high regeneration. Askin basically has insta-kill poison, and Lille is an intangible goober. Grummy has the ability to make whatever he imagines into reality, and the list could go on with how broken a lot of these abilities are, but I think these are going to be the main ones that people want to focus on. There's other abilities that I do kind of want to talk about, like say Bankai Yamamoto, Kisuke's Bankai, or even Cylopro's ability, but again, I don't want to do that because we'll actually be here for like 3 hours talking about their abilities, and I'll start fangasming over it, and then we'll just end up being here forever. So now with everything laid out on the table, who's going to win this match? And well, it really comes down to 2 things. 1, where are you arguing Yami Yugi's speed? And 2, where are you arguing the AP for Bleach? Because if you're not going to argue the weird, goobery, higher dimensional stuff from Aizen, they are not nearly strong enough to fight Yami Yugi, who is being compared to a being like Jaden, who I also did a video on, by the way, who is out here fighting beings that are creating the multiverse and is fighting beings from other multiverses, separate 5-dimensional constructs. This even puts him above beings like Bell, who are potentially capable of creating 12-dimensional constructs, which means it might not even matter if you highball the Bleach characters to being 7D, because then you can just highball Yami Yugi to 12D. And at that point, he is 5 infinities higher than the Bleach verse. At which point, it really doesn't matter what you're going to argue for Bleach's speed, even if you're going to say, that they have immeasurable speed, it doesn't matter because Yami Yugi also has an immeasurable speed feat, and would then proceed to just one-shot every character in the verse one by one because he would be 5 infinities stronger than them, and none of their abilities would affect him because he's 5 infinities greater than them. So really, it's an absolute wash either way, although I will say that having the higher stats is a huge advantage to Yami Yugi, because if we equalize the stats, he definitely gets washed. For instance, Yugioh is capable of destroying all Bankais in the Bleach verse, which he did in the final fight against Aizen and Ichigo, and so he could just do the same thing but with Yu-Gi-Oh cards. And now that the stats are equalized and he's not 5 infinities less than Yugi, he can actually do that now. Or you could just have someone like Baragon age him into nothingness, or have Aizen put him under an illusion at the very beginning of the fight. But that's just a little bit of copium on my part. I'm just saying that, hey, if we equalize the stats, Bleach has a chance, but realistically, if you dropped Yami Yugi into the Bleach verse, he would pretty much spank everybody there. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Again, if you want more information on the different Yu-Gi-Oh characters, I have a Yami Yugi video, a Seto Kaiba video, and a Jaden Yuki video up that are up all right now. You can go check those out if you want a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh power scaling. I also have a Yugi versus Jaden video coming out, where we kind of talk about the true outcome of that duel and who should be stronger than the other. Do be looking forward to that. I do also have a Minato versus Yoruichi video in the works as well, so we have some more even Bleach matchups, because I feel like Sinbad versus Yugioh and now Yugi versus the entire Bleach verse is a little too much for Bleach to handle right now. I want to give them a more even match, so look forward to those videos. And with that being said, I hope you guys have a nice day, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace late.